Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin, and this is going to be my first impressions of the Roland VAD716. This is Roland's new flagship that is replacing the VAD716, and it also has a brand new module. I think we all saw this coming because the 706 was slowly disappearing from music stores online, and the OG TD50, which the TD50X is based on, came out way back in 2016. So it was just time for the next generation. As you can see from the sign behind the drum set, I got a chance to play this at Edrum Center, so big shout out to them for allowing me to hog the drum set all day. And as always, I've got a discount link to them in the description below. This is not a sales video for that drum set. That link does work on the entire website. Okay, so let's start off with general sizes and also what's the same between this new kit and the 706 it's replacing. Don't worry, we're going to get into extreme detail on the new stuff a little bit later on. So this is a 6-piece drum set that has an 18x22 kick drum. The snare is 4.3 by 14. Tom 1 is 7 by 10. Tom 2 is 8 by 12. And the two floor toms are identical. They're 14 by 14. Personally, I think it would have been cool if the second floor tom was 16 by 14 or something like that to differentiate it. Roland is using 3 ply mesh heads for the snare and the floor toms. I love these heads. They're very dense. They have very low levels of rebound compared to traditional mesh heads. And the 2 high toms do have a little bit more of a bouncy 2-ply head. So you're going to get a different feel as you play from the snare to the high toms and then down to the floor toms. The drum set I was playing has the new satin walnut finish. It looks great, and I don't think that stock product photos on music store websites really do it justice. That's partly because it is a matte finish, and the grain doesn't stand out at every single angle, and it also depends on the lighting. But it looks really nice in person. This isn't the only finish though, there's a total of 5. The other 4 are the same ones that came on the 706. So there's natural, white, cherry, and ebony. I'm a sucker for shiny drums, so I like these gloss finishes. Though, I feel like it would have been a smarter move to get rid of all the old finishes, not because they look bad, they look great, but to make this drum set look a little bit more different from the old ones it's replacing. Now moving over to the cymbals, these are also unchanged from the previous drum set. The crashes are the CY16 RTs, they're 16 inches across, very thin, and they have a bit of flex on those harder hits. The ride cymbal is the 18-inch digital one, and for my money, it's still pretty much the nicest one out there on the market. The bell is super sensitive, it has positional sensing, and its static electricity sensor allows you to mute the cymbal not just by pinching the edge, but also just placing your hand on top of the cymbal. And with the V71, the ride cymbal can suddenly detect right to left directions in addition to up and down positional sensing. This is something that is new to this ride cymbal on this particular module. The digital hi-hats are a 14-inch 2-piece set. They have the same technologies as the ride cymbal, except for the bell zone, and they just feel nice because they have a thin profile. I like these hi-hats a lot. Roland's got some rock-solid cymbals here. You can make a case for the hi-hat and ride being the best in the entire industry. They are very impressive. But we can't give the entire set of cymbals a clean sweep over the competition just yet because there are some ways that could improve what they have here. The V71 module doesn't support the crash bell zones that are there, so they work, but they're not going to work in crash cymbal mode on this module. The digital hi-hat doesn't have a bell zone at all, and a lot of the competition have been adding bell zones to their hi-hats. Roland hasn't transitioned to 360 triggering on their cymbals like most of the competition, so there's that. And Roland also doesn't have much cymbal shape variety here. Meanwhile, the F-Note 707, which is basically the same price, has all of this going on. They've got a China, an ozone crash, and different crash cymbal sizes. And there's also a splash cymbal as well. When a drum set is this close to being perfect, you have to nitpick these kinds of things. But overall, the cymbals are fantastic, and if you sit down and play this, I promise you'll enjoy them. Now moving over to the hardware, this is also unchanged. You get nice cymbal stands with tom mounts that have ball joints. There's also a module stand included in the box because there is no drum rack to hold it. As always, you're going to need to have a hi-hat stand, a snare stand, and a kick drum pedal. Those are not included with this drum set. Do not cheap out on that snare stand because this snare is incredibly heavy. So now let's move ahead to the actual stuff that did get changed and improved. The most exciting upgrade is the PD12 DSX. This is the new version of their digital snare drum. The headlining new upgrade is the addition of a 3-in-1 snare throw-off. There's a sound for it too. You can also change it, so the menu system gives you 7 different sounds to choose from, plus control of the overall volume. The funny thing is, only 5 of those 7 sounds are acoustic snare throw-off sounds. 3 of them are just nonsense because Roland's trying to be funny. According to the manual, you can also set the lever to control effects in the module if you want, or function off. Most people will probably keep it as is though. The second part of the assembly is the control dial. Just like on an acoustic snare drum, you can turn this to adjust the wire tightness. But that's just the default. You can do other things, like you can set it to adjust the amount of muffling the snare drum has, or you can set it to change the snare tuning up and down. So I would actually keep it on that because I would rather have real-time pitch control. That's actually legitimately useful, and I think this dial, because it can do so many more things, is just as useful as the snare throw-off itself, if not more. And on top of that, literally, there's a button built into the control dial. So you can program this to do things like start the metronome or start a song or whatever you want. There's a list of functions. So you're not just turning off the snare wires and turning them back on. This whole thing actually adds 3 different levels of functionality. The next change to the snare drum is the rim. Instead of having the rubber silencer being on top of the metal rim, like usual, now they put it just inside the rim, which I don't know if I've seen before. It's kind of an interesting move on Roland's part. I think the rubber itself is also a little bit different. The main benefit of doing this, as far as I can tell, the reason why they did this is they wanted to lower the height difference between the rim and the head. Because when you put a rubber silencer on top of a metal rim, you're just raising the height, and so doing rim shots will be ever so slightly off if you're used to playing acoustic drums. And so this basically just gives you a subtle little upgrade. It's minor, but whenever you're making a flagship product that's an upgrade over something that was already really good, you're fighting for inches of ground. You're trying to make something that is better by 2% here and 2% there. The next difference is the addition of right and left hand detection. Although I would personally call it something like 360 positional sensing. It now has a pie grid, so it will see where you're playing up, down, right, and left, kind of like the hi-hat. So if you go to System, MIDI Control, you'll now see Snare Angle CC, in addition to Snare CC that was there on the older one, and also Strainer CC. This functionality kind of reminds me of the Mandela pads that Danny Carey uses. For my limited time in this menu and watching how it reacts to my playing, take this with a grain of salt, but I don't think it's 1000% accurate to the millimeter. This is not a sheet sensor, so the technology does have limitations. But the fact that it kind of knows where you are, that's incredibly impressive, given the fact that they're somehow triangulating your exact position based off of like 3 piezos. And I'm sure the MIDI nerds will find a use for this, just like they've found uses for the hi-hat right and left detection as well. In case you're wondering, here's what the new trigger basket looks like in comparison to the old one. The old one does have some wear and tear and it's dusty because it was actually a replacement job, but at least it lets you see that they look incredibly similar. To go any further, I would have had to take a screwdriver and remove all those plastic covers, but I wasn't going to do that because I don't own either of these and I don't want to break them or anything. One difference that you can see if you flip both snares upside down, the new snare doesn't have a function button anymore. The old one used it during the updating process, and I guess the new one doesn't really need it, so they got rid of it. So adding all the new and old features together, it's clear that this has become the most advanced electronic snare ever created. The PD14 DSX is incredibly impressive, and more importantly, it's just fun to play. But the question is, if you already own the old digital snare, do you absolutely positively need this new one? And at least to me, the answer to that is no. This is a great snare drum. I love it. But I also really liked the original digital snare. So at this point, Roland is doing stuff just because they can and to chase those 2% gains, along with the coolness factor. Some people buy the new expensive stuff just because they like having the latest and greatest, and this is definitely that. Okay, so now let's move ahead to a much simpler new component, the KD22 kick drum. This is nearly the same as the old KD222 kick drum. The main difference is a larger strike surface. The old one was roughly 5 inches or so. I've actually got it myself. I did a review on it. They sold the component separately as the KD822 conversion package. And the new one is basically, I think it's 6.5 or something, so it's a little bit larger. Also, it gets rid of that gap between the plate and the strike area, so it looks cleaner. The reason why they really needed to add a larger strike surface is that the old one was a little bit tricky to set up with chunky beaters. Like you'd have to rotate the drum head so it was positioned just right, and if you didn't do that, it might clip the plastic, guard that goes around it, and that was annoying. Also, if you had like lower beaters than normal, it would probably miss the strike plate as well. So basically, Roland just gives you more wiggle room with this design. The problem is it's freaking loud. By the way, if you happen to have any VAD kick drum that has this sort of sensor, I would recommend putting blankets and pillows inside of it because that will cut out some of that noise by reducing the vibrations inside of that kick drum. I personally would have preferred if they just used the DWE kick drum system. So take that exact mesh head, that exact same center, and that exact same block of foam and put that on the Roland drums. Because they own the company now, they should take the best parts of the DWE because the work's already been done. Something else you'll notice is that the footage I've been showing you has a kick drum patch on it from Roland. This is the KDP5. And the reason why they want you to put this on is that will sort of get rid of any marks that would have gone on that pad if you're using felt kick drum beaters. The thing though is that you don't have to use this exact Roland patch. You can use this one, you can use an Evans patch, you can use a Remo patch, whatever you want. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we cover the V71 module is the toms. You may have noticed in my news video that I said that, just like on the 706, these toms don't have positional sensing. So you're going to get rim and head zones, but no tonal changes when you play from the center to the edge. You will get maybe sensitivity changes because if you accidentally play nearer a sensor or farther away from a sensor, the volume or the sensitivity will change, but you're not actually getting different kinds of samples. There is no positional sensing on these toms. But I also said in that news video that I didn't know for sure if the V71 module even had tone changes if you did plug in a pad that had positional sensing in the first place. So I went looking so I could be, more thorough in this video, and I checked. And the answer is no. Using a PDX 100 pad, I wasn't getting any tone changes from the center to the edge on a tom instrument. Digging into the data list manual though, it appears that the rim zone of the tom instruments are tagged as having a sort of a positional sensing change. I believe this means that you can get shallow rim shots in addition to open rim shots. So it's a very minor thing and I wouldn't lose sleep over it. All right, so let's talk about the new V71 module. From a photo and also real life, it definitely looks a lot like the TD50X. The ports, the buttons, and the color of the thing share a lot in common. But you can also say a similar thing for the TD30, or to a lesser extent the TD20, or even going back to the TD10. Roland flagships of the past, they've always been boxes that are gray or black with a bunch of ports on the back of it. And this just continues in that trend, but with the addition of a color screen, and it's also their heaviest flagship module ever. For ports, the V71 has master XLRs, balanced master quarter-inch outputs. Then there's also an additional 8 balanced direct outs. We've got the standard foot switch input, which can do a ton of different things. There's the mix import, 5-pin MIDI in, out, through, 2 headphone jacks of different sizes up front. USB-C, which can output 32 channels of audio, which is great for recording, or MIDI if you want to use like a drum plugin. And then of course you get the SD card slot, which I believe you use for importing your own one-shot samples. And I believe you can either record to it or transfer recordings done in the module to it, unless I am missing something. When it comes to trigger inputs, you get 3 digital ones and 14 analog ones. But unfortunately, that does not add up to a total of 17 pads. It's an either-or situation. So you can't use the digital hi-hat and also the analog hi-hat ports at the same time. So the V71 maxes out at 14 total pads, and more if you use cable splitters, but most people won't do that. The V71 does take a while to boot up, and this is kind of a new thing. Older Roland modules like my TD30, you turn them on and they're not instantaneous, but they nearly are. But I think this new module just has more data inside that is loading, and that's why it takes a loading bar. So I actually see this as a positive sign. On the front of the module, we finally got the color screen we probably should have had way back in 2012. It's small, about 4.3 inches across, but it's definitely an improvement over the ones that came on previous Roland flagships. Oddly enough though, this made some people mad in the comment section. Apparently there's a group that thinks that flagship modules really should have a 9 or 12-inch, colored touchscreen because you can see more at once and it makes the module look up to date. But then other people think that sweaty hands on stage don't mix well with touchscreens, and that buttons are more precise and reliable in high-stakes situations. My personal opinion is that you can make a good module if it has a touchscreen or if it doesn't have a touchscreen. Although there is a nice balance to strike, because if you go full touchscreen and don't have a single button or a single control dial on it, I don't think that's very smart. I do think the Pearl Mimic went a little bit too extreme. I would have rather had a dedicated control dial just for master out, just for headphone, and just for mix in, and then some kit plus or minus buttons. All right, but then other modules that have a tiny, tiny screen and it's just 99% buttons, I think that's also too extreme in the opposite direction. The funny thing is, even Roland themselves have internal disagreements on this, because some of their keyboards do have big colored touchscreens. Take a look at the Roland Phantom 8. So even Roland themselves will go both directions depending on the instrument. Anyway, the button situation did get a shakeup compared to what comes on the TD50X. They moved some stuff around and they added a few things. On the top left, we have a new phones only button. If you hold that down, the outputs are muted except for your headphones. That kind of feature is definitely handy for stage use, so I'm sure that drum technicians will appreciate it. It's kind of interesting how often Roland will add stage-like features that most people won't use, but people that are using these live will. Because drum technicians, they need to power a bunch of bar triggers or random electronic snares. So next up, we've got the editing. While Roland is definitely pushing the fact that they sampled a lot of drums in depth for the internal sound library, it's still a Roland module we're talking about. It's not a plugin in a box like the Pearl Mimic. So Roland is taking these samples and they're running them through whatever their modeling engine or whatever it is that you want to call it that allows them to have all these crazy editing controls that only Roland modules can do. So here's a quick rundown. On the snare, you get tuning, muffling, you can change the virtual shell depth, overtone volume control, which is a bigger deal than it might seem like, snare strainer adjust for the number of wires, and the volume of buzz can be messed with. Plus, in a separate menu, you can adjust which drums will resonate with the snare buzz, like if you want the kick drum to have a little bit of snare buzz, and also how loudly. Even the cross stick has a dedicated V-edit menu, so if you want to have more snare buzz and a higher pitch and less muffling, you can apply those changes only to the cross stick sound and not the rest of the snare drum. That amount of independent zone control is crazy. There's 3 drum head types to choose from: clear, coated, and pinstripe. You can also change the distance of the virtual mic that is miking the snare. Kick drums get a lot of the same snare options, but also you get beater types. So they got felt, wood, and plastic. Plus you can change the size of the virtual microphone, in addition to changing how far that virtual microphone is inside or outside the kick drum. On the hi-hats, you can change the size, the cymbal thickness, and set them to be fixed at a certain open or closed level. That last one can also be triggered with a foot switch on the ground, so it's kind of cool for double kick situations. It's like a virtual hi-hat drop clutch or whatever. You can also mess with the hi-hat open and close balance in the mixer menu, along with closed pedal volume. I didn't get footage of the ride or crash edits, but in the manual they list a few additional options the hi-hat doesn't have: muffling and sizzle types. You can add rivets, chain, beads, or coin sound modifiers. So that's the V-edit stuff, but on top of that, we still have the regular suite of mixing options. So every single layer has EQ and transient controls. Every single pad is EQ and compression. Plus there's master EQ and compression on top of that. There's an overhead mic simulator, room resonance and reverb, along with a dedicated fader to control that in real time. There's bus options, sidechain compression is possible, systems of effects to choose from. Here's a massive diagram that shows you how everything interconnects. It's a lot. It's basically a DAW in a box. You don't even have to dive into all the deep editing if you don't want to. You can just stick to pressing the plus or minus buttons to change kits, and then use the faders to adjust the reverb, volume, and all that sort of stuff, and be perfectly fine. But just know that all that editing, all that depth is there in case you need it down the line. And there's so much going on that if you really dive into it, you will not get bored of this module for a very, very long time. And if you don't want to destroy your back, hunched over the module for an hour as you painstakingly modify stuff, Roland has the V71 computer editor. So I didn't get any footage of this, but basically you can do all the kit changes on your laptop with a bigger screen instead of with the small color screen on the front of the module. Something cool about the new V71 is that every zone can have 3 instruments instead of 2 on the old one. That alone will give the preset sellers like the Edrum Workshop or vexpressions.com new possibilities. User sample import apparently didn't get an upgrade, so it's still one-shot WAV files. You can get 500 samples or a total sound length of 24 minutes in mono. I don't know how much that is in megabytes or gigabytes. You can import multi-layered round-robin samples, but only from the Roland Cloud, and from them themselves. Some of those are free, and some of them cost $30 per kit. You do get 6 months of access to their subscription, which I think is actually $20 a month. So you can download all of these right away and enjoy them for half a year. But I would not continue that subscription after that. All right, so download everything, and then what you actually really, really like, I would go buy those kits outright for $30 each. Because monetarily, this service is not worth $20 a month to drummers specifically. You're buying some of these kits twice if you just go in there and just buy everything. Some are labeled as drummer position, and some are labeled as producer position. I was under the mistaken impression that position was a toggle switch inside of the module, because inside of the promo video, they had the position label right over the F6 button. But in reality, this is just a sales descriptor of a couple of DW kits on the Roland Cloud. Basically, it's a radio mix or a sort of raw mix of the same kit, just with different effects and different panning. And so it sounds different, but you're actually playing the exact same drums. If you open up the specs of both of these, all right, you're getting recordings of the exact same toms and the exact same snare drums and the exact same kick drum. So I wouldn't buy both of them. I'd play them both, like listen to the sound examples, and then just buy the one that you think sounds better mixed to you. And in case you're wondering, yes, you can do those V edits to these sounds. You're not just playing them raw as is. I did go check the settings menu of one of those DW kits. Roland says they took the same samples used in the DWE Soundworks plugin and modified them with their engine to create these new module versions. So these are not the original size, but they're supposed to sound the same, and you can use the V edits on them. They also load really fast inside of the module. And you can also use the DWE plugin if you want. It's on the Roland Cloud, and you have free access to it for about 6 months until that trial runs out. But there is a convenience factor of not having to use a cable and dealing with an external plugin. It's nice to have those sounds inside of the module. Okay, so now let's talk about the sounds. There are over 1,000 instruments across 70 kits, and of course the DW expansions. I'm glad that Roland has learned from their mistake of the original launch of the TD50, because that had roughly 400 instruments, and that broke down to having like 2 ride cymbals, stupid things like that, where there just weren't enough sounds built into the module. They fixed this problem with the TD50X upgrade, and now with the V71, they're just getting rid of that problem entirely. This has plenty of sounds built in. Now, some people might be wondering, does this module still have the Roland sound, TM, or the Roland tone stamped onto it? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. The moment I sat down and played this, because I've played a lot of Roland modules and I've owned multiple Roland modules, I immediately played this and I was like, yeah, that's not a plugin. That's definitely a Roland sounding module. And I don't mean that as an ultra negative thing. What the Roland sound is kind of hard to explain, but whatever sonic pipeline Roland uses seems to add this aggressively crisp, ultra clean, ultra detailed, airy stamp to things, like almost like a reverby kind of sound to it. Now, how much of this is baked into the samples and how much of it is from the modeling engine and how much of it is from the ambience engine or whatever you want to call it, and how much of it is just the way they mix the kit and the way the transients are inside the module, I don't know. It could be a little bit of everything. If you want to see a little bit of what I'm talking about, go check out this video from the Edrum workshop where he ran multiple different modules from different companies through the USB connection to the TD50X, and it shows how the way Roland has ambience inside of their modules affects the sound of other samples. It was very eye-opening for me. Now, all that being said, the Roland sound has evolved. So even if you've played a bunch of Roland modules in the past and you didn't like the TD20 or the TD30 or whatever, this is definitely a different module. Give it a chance. If I had to describe what's happening here, I'd say that these kits are an evolution of the TD50X sound direction. I'm not saying that these are sounds from that module. I'm saying that that's the starting point kind of, and they're moving on from that and sort of evolving it. But you can definitely tell that it's kind of like the TD50X. I liked that module, and I like this one too. I think they did a fantastic job, and you will have fun playing these kits. Now, to be clear, not all 70 kits are a complete home run, because it's hard to make 70 kits that are all completely different from each other and they're all fantastic in their own unique way. You know, there's definitely some BS kits and some kits that are mixed in certain ways that I don't love as much. But there are some legit awesome sounding drums and cymbals inside of this module. If you go to a music store, play a few kits, now actually play a bunch of the kits. Don't just play kit 1, 2, and 3. Go through the module a little bit, give it a chance. There's a bunch of variety in there, and I think you might actually enjoy it more than you suspect. Personally, for me, I like Roland modules, and I think this is their best one ever. As an overall package, I can't think of any other modules that do every single thing the V71 can do. It's got a lot of sounds, it's got a lot of kits, it's got more editing than anybody else has, it's got a ton of ports, it's got expansions available. This thing has options and obscure menus that you never even thought of asking for. And part of this comes from what I'm just going to call feature creep. Because Roland's been doing this for a long time. It's been 25 years. And so feature after feature has slowly just piled up. And so this thing just has more options inside of it than a lot of competing modules. This also means that they've gotten angry emails for 25 years where people want them to change this or that. So at this point, Roland just knows what they're doing when it comes to making a flagship. Okay, so now let's zoom out a little bit. I've been talking about the individual features of the drum set, but now let's acknowledge that there is a lot of competition, especially lately. It used to be basically Roland and Yamaha, or maybe Roland, Yamaha, and 2-box, and in the past it was Cymbals and D-drum, that sort of thing. But more recently, everybody's got a flagship right now. I recently played a revised version of the Geva G9 Pro 5. F-Note popped up with their Pro 716, which was really, really nice. It's fantastic, actually. Zildjian is out here making electronic drums for some reason, and so is DW, okay? Every company has their own ideas, they've got their own twist on the formula, and what they think makes an awesome flagship kit. But one thing you'll notice is that most of the companies that have a flagship caliber electronic drum set, they're on their first or second ever flagship. They haven't been doing this for that long. So the difference is, while they're on their first flagship, Roland is on flagship number 8. I'm not saying that this drum set is 8 times better than what F-Note or Geva or whoever is doing. I'm just saying that Roland does have a level of sophistication and polish to their drum set that some of the other brands aren't quite at yet. By the way, there is no perfect electronic drum set, even when it comes to this kit. There are ways they could improve it in the future. But that doesn't change the fact this drum set is absurdly good, and it's pretty much the best electronic drum set that money can buy. This thing is awesome. But I also need to bring up the fact that it is $9,000. So for most people, myself included, we don't need this, all right? It's a flagship. And the people that want to buy this sort of thing, they have the money, absolutely, perfectly fine. But for most people, you'll be just fine buying a VAD507. And also the TD27 KV2 is more than enough for most people as well. But some people just like to buy the bleeding edge best of the best. And some people sometimes will need the higher end professional features of this if they're buying it for certain, on stage situations. So the people that need this or the people that just want it badly enough, you know who you are. But that's one of the nice things about a flagship. When a company just puts every feature they can into one product just because they can. It's going to be absurdly expensive. It's not going to be for 90% of people, probably 99% of people. But that's one of the reasons why I like it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.